So anytime you plot the graph of one variable against another variable, it's called a loop. But the graph of one of the variables against time is called waveform or scalar. Okay? So this is one of them here, pressure volume loop. What we call this here is compliance curve. Because the way we calculate compliance is standard volume divided by pressure, period. So we call this the compliance curve. Okay? Where did the other one go? Well, I'm missing it. The other one is supposed to be on that end, the flow volume loop. Flow volume loop, but we're going to go by it. So the other loop is flow volume loop. So you have flow volume loop or you have pressure volume loop. Okay? So now let's look at pressure volume loop here. This is very important because it shows up on the exam too. Now, when you plot a graph of volume against pressure, this is what it looks like here, like that. It looks like the football, right? American football, okay? So anytime you plot that graph, it doesn't look like football, something is wrong with it. Something's wrong with the patient or the ventilator. If the ventilator is not drawing it that way, okay? So now, see like how this one here looks, it's almost like a perfect football with a tail. What we call that is the fish tail. It looks like a fish. So this will be assisted breath, like when the patient assists, pulls back before the ventilator comes on, it will look like this. Otherwise, it's going to look like this when there is time-triggered breath. Okay? Now, this is spontaneous breath. What's going to look like? Okay? Because the patient pulls back and pressure begins to rise over here and then ends in front here. So spontaneous breath, assisted breath, because the patient has to pull back first before the pressure goes up. This is where the patient begins from the origin. Okay, the baseline is 0, the machine triggered. Okay, the patient didn't have to make an inspiratory effort. Okay? Okay, so now, components of the compliance curve are the football. Okay? Right here, okay, see now where we started here, pressure is going up, and then all of a sudden here, there's a change in direction. The thing goes up. That point is called the inflation point. Inflation point just means change in direction. What happened there is that the flow is coming into the lungs, and then all of a sudden, the lungs went like that. So what we call it, the lower inflation point, is alveolar recruitment, because that's the point at which the lungs opened up. Alveolar recruitment. Okay, that's the lower inflation point, changing direction of the curve. Okay? So now, what you got there now, the lungs opened up, and then here's your peak inspiration. And now the patient is exhaling now. See now, exhaling. Here then, there's another inflation point where the curve goes down like that. So this is the upper inflation point. This is the lower inflation point. The lower inflation point is the point at which the alveoli closes back up. So what we call that is alveolar de-recruitment. Alveolar de-recruitment. They close back up. Okay, so if we're looking at the football and everything is going normal, you have to be able to see the lower inflation point and the upper inflation point. Otherwise, something is wrong with the patient or the ventilator. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay, on the exam also, they will say, what does that represent? The lower inflation point. It represents optimal PEEP. Is optimal PEEP, the normal amount of PEEP that they're supposed to have. Because that is the point at which the lung opens up. Okay? Optimal PEEP, alveolar recruitment, lower inflation point. Every one of that will be great. Okay, so now I remember now that on the scalar, when we added PEEP, the baseline went up, the whole graph was pulled up by however many points you set your PEEP. On the flow volume, pressure volume loop, once you add PEEP, the football will be moved forward like that. So this will be PEEP of 5. They can show you this. They usually have like small lines here. They number it and give you something like this, and then they say, well, how much PEEP is the patient receiving? So you're just going to see how many points the football is pushed forward. That will be the amount of PEEP. On the scalar, you want to look how many points the graph is moved up. Okay? Okay, so if you look at the football, it has resistive walk, a portion that is resistive walk, and the portion that is elastic walk. All that means is that right here, when you're breathing in, the flow is encountering resistance to get down into the alveolus. And then after that, it goes through here. The next thing is inflation, which is your elastic walk. So the lower point on the football is the resistive walk as gas is going inside the lungs, and then the upper portion is your elastic walk as the gas now is inflating the lungs. Okay? Okay, so this is inadequate sensitivity. Remember the fish that I showed you on the first page? It's nothing like this. So when you see it look like this, not well developed, that means that the sensitivity is inadequate. Okay? You're going to have to increase your sensitivity. Make it easier for the patient to turn the ventilator on. This is what airlift will look like. Okay? Airlift just means that the patient gets the volume from the ventilator, but when it's returning from the patient back to the ventilator to be measured, it's leaking out somewhere. And it can be through the cuff, UT cuff. That will make it look like that. You troubleshoot, they show you this, you troubleshoot for air leak. Okay? Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Okay, so now this is this is what the football will look like with increased resistance. Increased resistance. Okay? Now look, here's a normal football here. Now, here's normal football, like that. Like that. That's normal football. So now, this is a normal football. So that means if you draw the line from here to down here, you see that the pressure increased from here to here. But the tidal volume is staying the same. So that's increase in resistance on a volume controlled mode. The tidal volume is the same, but the PIP has gone up. So it's like, initially your football is like this, and then you come back from lunch, it's like that. That's increasing resistance. There's more pressure now being used to deliver that tidal volume. Okay? So now this is on the volume controlled mode. You have your tidal volume constant. Now, here's tidal volume constant here. Okay, here's your normal one. The green one is your normal one. And this one here is tending out here will be a decrease in lung compliance because now you're using more pressure, okay, to try to push in that tidal volume. So the pressure is way out here. This is our normal pressure. So this will be a decrease in lung compliance, an increase in lung compliance because now you're using lower pressure than here to deliver the same volume. Okay? So like that would mean a decrease in compliance. Like that, if you're standing up like that, then that would be an increase in lung compliance. Now, I think this is pressure control, decrease in lung compliance on pressure control. As we know, on a pressure control mode, when compliance decreases, tidal volume decreases. Okay, so that's what you're looking at. The PIP will remain the same. So now, here's normal breath, and then these other two breaths. So here's your PIP. It is constant right here, constant right here. Now this is your tidal volume for this one here. So there is lower tidal volume. So that would mean that compliance here is very low. And this is where you have increase in lung compliance. You're still using the same amount of pressure, but your tidal volume is high. This is very important. That's one thing that you need to, it's always on the exam. Now, this is what we call overdistension. Overdistension. They call it the butt beak. The butt beak. Overdistension. So that means that, as you add pressure, you increase volume. As you add pressure, you increase volume like that. And then it gets to a point where more pressure, more addition to the pressure does not result in any addition in volume. So right here, the curve here is flattened out. So look, more pressure, here's your pressure here, here's your volume, pressure, volume, pressure, volume. As pressure increases, volume increases, until you get to a point where additional pressure does not necessarily result in an increase in volume. That means that you're over-distending the lungs. Anytime you over-distend the lungs, compliance will fall. Compliance will decrease. Okay? So now, they showed me this graph here, and they said, well, what is this? I said, well, it's over-distension. Okay. What are you going to do about it? You're in a volume controlled mode. What would you do about it? Well, I would decrease my tidal volume. Right? If I'm on pressure control mode, they show me this, what am I going to do about it? I will decrease my PIP, because my PIP is responsible for the magnitude of my tidal volume. Another thing that you may see about this is the patient may be on a volume controlled mode, and they ask you, what would you do about it? And then they don't give you the option to decrease the tidal volume, but they're giving you the option to switch to pressure control. That would be a good answer, because you got to control that. Any questions about the butt beak? Addition in pressure does not result in addition in volume. Okay, so this one here is also very important. I have seen it on the exam, not a lot, but right here, this is what you got. Let me draw it out here. So, it's a 6. Okay, the patient started to inhale from here. He started to inhale right there. And then all of a sudden it's like that. Is that a perfect football? No, it doesn't look like a football. It doesn't look anything like that. So what's going on here is that it took a pressure of 5. It took a pressure of 5 inside your lungs before they opened up. That's what that means. Okay, so air's coming in, and then you build a pressure of 5 inside the lungs before they opened up. So what we need to do with that is we're going to have to put that patient on a PEEP of 5. They need to always have a PEEP of 5 inside their lungs. Okay? So once you fix that, what you're going to see is that. Okay? So to summarize this, when the football is flat at the bottom, right? you increase pressure. When the football is flat at the top, you decrease pressure. So the same thing, a decrease in pressure will mean decrease in volume. So the same thing. Okay? So flow volume loop now, the other one, here's what it looks like. Okay? Here is inspiration, here's exhalation. Of course, we pay more attention to the expiratory flow when you're dealing with flow volume loop. You want to know how much flow that is coming out from their lungs. With COPD patients or obstructive diseases, they have a harder time trying to get flow out of their lungs than getting it in. Their problem is not really breathing in, the problem is breathing out. That's why they have the more hard time doing, breathing out. So now, this is normal here. The highest point on this one here, this curve here up here, is called the peak inspiratory flow. And then the lowest point is called the peak expiratory flow. Peak expiratory flow. This is your how we measure the tidal volume. So we're measuring volume horizontally, and then we are measuring flow vertically. This is your FRC, okay, the amount of volume inside your lungs at the end of exhalation right here, before the volume begins to increase, okay? So now, we can tell who is COPD and who is not, okay? Because if you're COPD, well, your flow should be low, okay, right here should be low. If you're restrictive, then your volume ought to be smaller than this. So if we go here, first of all, let's look at the air leak. This, if you're having air leak on the ventilator and you're looking at the flow volume loop, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, the expiratory flow is not returning to baseline. It's supposed to come back here, all the way back to the ventilator, but it's not. So it's leaking at somewhere. Usually, your cuff, the ET tube cuff, is what it's going to do there. This is what air trapping is going to look like. If they are doing air trapping, you look at your flow volume loop, it looks like that. So the patient is trapping this amount of air. Okay, the expiratory flow does not return to baseline. It's supposed to return to baseline here, but it's not. Okay, so this is that flow volume loop, airway resistance. Now look here, this is the normal flow volume loop. There, like that, is a normal flow volume loop. But now we got a COPD patient, okay? Now see, this is the one for COPD, right here. Now see how smaller their expiratory flow is? The normal one is down here, but this is where they are. So that means they're not exhaling out a whole lot of air. Now again, you see how this portion here is pushed in. What we call that is scooped out pattern. What causes that is airway resistance. Okay? As resistance to expiratory flow, that's what causes that. So this will be obstructive disease. Okay? Now, on the exam, they can show you this and say, well, what is this? You can say, increased airway resistance. That would be a good answer, okay? Because that's what's causing that. They can't exhale out. Well, they may go COPD, or maybe bronchitis, or bronchitis, or cystic fibrosis. Well, the fact is that if you have obstructive disease, you're going to have increased airway resistance. Or maybe they may name a disease. They may go emphysema. That would also be a good answer because emphysema is a COPD disease and it causes high airway resistance. Any questions about that? Okay, so this one here, these little things here, now that for the scalar or waveform, this is what it looks like. on your respiratory flow, it looks like that. That is increased airway resistance. When the patient is exhaling out increased airway resistance. But for the loop, it will show like that. It will show like that. So when you see that, you go, well, what would you do to the patient? Well, if you ask me to give them a breathing treatment, that works. That can lower airway resistance. If you ask me to drain water from the ventilator socket, yeah, that would be a good answer. That can lower airway resistance. If you tell me to suction the patient, yeah, that works. That will lower airway resistance. But whatever that causes airway resistance, we'll make those two look like that. Any questions about that? Oh yeah, I do have it right here. There it goes right there. They show you that. Pick an answer that will lower airway resistance. Okay? Breathing treatment, suctioning the patient, draining the water in the ventilator socket, unkinking the airway, decreasing edema in the airway, all of that. Okay. Oh, okay. Some more here. This is what is that? That looks like extrathoracic obstruction, like obstruction above the airway. That's what it looks like. Yeah, maybe a little bit wrong. This extrathoracic obstruction, like sleep apnea, will be there. Okay. Any questions about that? Now let me show you the one that I don't have here. Like if you were looking at that flow volume loop, let's say that this is normal, like that. Okay, but now it looks like this. Okay, so from here to here is smaller than from here to here. So that would be, the volume is smaller, so that would be a restricted disease. Okay, if it's restricted disease, you have smaller volume. If it's obstructive disease, you're gonna have lower flow rates. Okay? Yeah, sometime in the lab, we're gonna turn the ventilator on, and then we're going to observe all these things here going. All right, so that's all I got for today. I was gonna do a clinical simulation, but that's okay. I will get it next week.